Thank you very much for joining us for the first episode, which is going to be our Level Up Lounge podcast, which will be running a series of podcasts and joined by gaming industry leaders and four trailblazers, shall I say. And it will be hosted by myself and my co-host here, Dwayne.
Howdy.
And we are the guys behind Level Up, which we are the region's first dedicated partner when it comes to talent within the gaming industry here within the MENA region. Now, I'm very pleased to introduce our first guest today, who doesn't really need much of an introduction, I think it's fair to say, but we are joined by co-founder and CEO of Artisan Studios, Mr. Mario Rizzo. Thank you very much for joining us. And Artisan Studios, hopefully you'll be familiar with games such as Super Neptunia and Astria Ascending. So, Mario, thank you very much for joining us.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, guys.
No problem.
It's good. So we just want to obviously have a general chit-chat with you today. We're going to talk around how you got into the industry, your journey. It's quite an exciting one. You've worked for some awesome studios. I think you're Sony, Electronic Art, Ubisoft, etc. Go through those, and then want to know what you're playing as well at the end of the show as well. So how... Your journey, do you want to just give us a bit of a snapshot? You've had a long, extensive, you're a veteran, shall we say, in the industry. So how did that come about?
Yeah. I mean, the quick version is, so now I did a check when I heard that we were going to talk about this today. And this December, I think, is my 23rd year in the games industry. And I know it feels like it's flown by, right? But the truth is, it was a complete accident that I got into the games industry. I was working in banking, in commercial banking. I had dropped out of university at the time, I think, and I was studying culinary arts. I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I was
That's like, a very broad.
Yeah. I was like, I want to be a chef, but I want to make money, and and it was just a coincidence.
Chef within a bank.
That would have been nice. Yeah. And I just had a friend who one day told me, we were working odd jobs. Back then when you're young, you kind of worked anywhere, a video store or whatever. And a friend of mine who worked with me, who was kind of, I would say, maybe not the most motivated worker, was like, I'm quitting. And I remember everybody where I worked was quite shocked. Like, what do you mean you're quitting? Like, this is like the easiest job in the world. And, we've got no responsibility. We're in our early 20s. And, and he's like, no, I'm going to be a game designer at Sony. And we laughed. I think we laughed for like a good hour teasing him about this. And afterwards, he pulled me aside. He said, no, really, I am going to be a game designer. I really want you to take this seriously. And by the way, they're having kind of a corporate party. It was Christmas time in San Diego, which is where I'm from. And he said, there's a Christmas party. Normally, I'm allowed to bring a date, but I can bring you as my plus one. And I want you to meet them because I really think you should come with me to this company. And that was basically how I had my informal interview. So it was the Sony Online Christmas party. So at the time, there was a company in San Diego called Variant Interactive. Yeah. The CEO of that company, his name was John Smedley. He was a very clever guy. He was an ex-PlayStation guy from San Diego, but he loved PC games and online games. And so what he did was he quit, basically, working at Sony because they were building a PC game. And at that time, PS1 was out, and they kind of told them, hey, we want you to focus on PS1 and the upcoming PS2, so no more PC games. So he took his team with him, got the blessing of Sony, and they licensed him the IP for a game that they were working on at Sony called EverQuest.
Okay.
And then he made his own studio and created the very first 3D MMORPG. And that was made in San Diego. So that was, I don't know, it must have been at least, it was 99. Right.
So, question on that. Obviously, I find it quite interesting now. Is your friend approached you, said, "Want to go be a game designer?"
Yeah.
I grew up not really realizing that working within the games industry was even a thing. I think that's obviously another conversation when we talk around education and that. But I didn't know when I was growing up that I could go and build games, design games. I think looking back now, if I did know, I probably would have chased that. Yeah. But how did you sort of, when you were approached with that, when you were working in banking, doing your culinary stuff, was that a bit of a mind-blowing sort of scenario? Because I'm guessing you were a bit of a gamer leading into that. So,
yeah, I mean, I had heard things like, because I had followed kind of Japanese game development since I was a small kid.
Interesting.
And that came from, I had a big love of Nintendo when I was growing up. part of that is my name is Mario. And when I was 8 years old, a game called Super Mario came out, and basically everybody, that became the joke for the rest of my life. Where's the princess? Do you have a brother named Luigi? Like so then I had to be very good at the game then. So back then it was coin-op game. So I went to the local grocery store and it was 25 cents to play Super Mario Brothers. What I knew of game development was it was programmers. And I was not a programmer. And I wasn't great at math. It looks funny from banker, but commercial banking. But so I just kind of gave up. I thought, oh, there's no chance. I shouldn't even attempt to be a video. But I did, growing up, have a lot of experience with RPGs. What I mean is, I grew up playing like tabletop games like Dungeons and Dragons or Vampire the Masquerade. I had a group of friends in high school. We would write our own stories and create rules and systems. And what I found was super interesting when I went and got the job at Sony, most of those people also had no experience in game development on the design team. Most of them came from a background of tabletop game playing, so they were like, oh yeah, I used to write my own campaigns in D&D, and I got in my car and drove from Florida to San Diego just to take this job as an intern to work on EverQuest, because back then that was the pitch for the game was, the internet was brand new. It was, like I said, it was 99. So there was online gaming, but it was very limited. It was like dial-up, and broadband was just starting to come to the forefront, and they invented this game that was basically, it was like Dungeons and Dragons, but it was online with, hundreds of thousands of other players, and people were like blown away. I mean, it was, at the time, it was a huge tech leap. That was, years before World of Warcraft, and that part of the story comes later. But
So you obviously joined Sony, started your career there. Next step on the ladder for you was Electronic Arts?
Actually, what happened after Sony was we finished on PlayStation 3, so the weird story about that company is I told you they left, they became a startup, but they became so big that Sony bought them back.
Okay.
And then they were reintegrated. But this time it wasn't Sony Electronics who bought them, it was Sony Pictures, the movie division. So the film division of Sony thought that John Smedley's company would eventually lead to big transmedia stuff between online, and so the division became known as Sony Online, and we dealt with all the online stuff. When PlayStation 3 was in development, they needed to develop a competitor to Xbox, which became PlayStation Network. So even though we were primarily a game development company, they shifted the whole studio and said, hey, everybody stop whatever game you're working on. Now we're doing PS3 Network. So the last thing I did at Sony was work on PS3. And pretty much it was 16-hour days, 7 days. It was like 9 months of crunch, eating dinners every night in the office. It was crazy because they were behind on the launch of PS3, and they basically said, this is the date, has to be done by this date. We got the orders from Japan, so we're like, okay. And after that, I was exhausted. And basically at that time, I was what they call a producer, which is kind of like the head of a game team, basically the manager of the game team. So I'm responsible for not just the creative, but also the financial and the performance of the game and hiring and things like this. And they told me, okay, Mario, before we spin up any new games, you've been working really hard, take 3 months, just hang out in the office, read your email, play some games, relax. You need a little break, right? And in the middle of all that, I got a call from these guys in Scotland. And they're like, hey, Mario, we noticed you've been working for the last 5 or so years on these online games as a producer, and we want to make an online game. Do you want to come meet us? And I'm like, I had never left the US, by the way. And I'm like, not really sure I'd like to do that. And they're like, well, just come meet. Our CEO wants to meet you. You may have heard of him. He made a game that maybe you know of. It's called Grand Theft Auto. And I'm like, yeah, I've heard of that. I may have heard of that. And they're like, yeah, fly to Scotland. And so my second job was working for a company called Real Time Worlds, which was founded by Dave Jones, the co-creator of the Grand Theft Auto 1 and 2. He also created Lemmings. And that was my first real international, I was, mid-20s, left the US.
How was Scotland, moving to Scotland?
Oh, wow. I was tremendous culture shock, actually. I was very surprised by that, because I think in your mind, you watch Braveheart and you're American and you think, they speak English. At least I thought, before I went to Dundee. And And I was like, how different could it be? But back then it was like 2004 when I moved. So like things like for instance, like there was McDonald's, but I don't think there was KFC. I think most of the brands that are just so normal in the US, I didn't even see there yet. I even remember one of the American executives when he would fly over for meetings in Dundee. He's like, "We got to open a KFC here. We're gonna make a ton of money." Like he wanted to bring KFC to Scotland, right? And it was. I mean, for me, it was the first time in my life I was like really like, "Oh wow."
Fish
I was
out of
far.
water.
Yeah, I was far from my family. It was totally different culture. They were a great company, super nice, obviously. Some of the difficulties they had were well documented in the amount of money they raised, the type of game they tried to make. And strangely enough, I ended up spending a lot of time in Korea because at the time they had a Korean publisher. So they told me, "Hey, Mario, you're the producer and the publisher wants to meet the producer of the game." So I think I was in Scotland for like a month. And then they're like, "Hey, can you get on a plane and go to Seoul and stay there for a couple months with the publisher?" And I'm like, "What am I going to do for a couple months?" And that's when they explained to me they had a studio there and they had a team of artists who were working on the game there. So interestingly, I kind of got exposed, my first trips ever really to East Asia and my first time in the UK was then.
That's interesting. And did that start obviously your games that you create at your studio are very Eastern sort of, from an art perspective.
Oh yeah.
Did that sort of really start your love for that type of visuals that you now see in your games?
Oh yeah, I mean there was that, and I think growing up as a child, what started that for me was, did you ever? So I started when I was a very young child. My grandfather at the time, my adopted grandfather in California, had an Atari 2600, and so what he would do is, I was 3 or 4 years old. They never let me have it. He kept it at his house. Yeah. And part of the grandparent trick was, hey, if you want to play the Atari, you come visit grandpa, right? Yeah. So go see grandpa. Yeah, we eat lunch, blah, blah, blah. Now let's go to the room and play Atari, grandpa. Yeah. So I started at that age really, but it wasn't until I was 8 or 9 when my parents bought me an NES because of Super Mario Brothers. And my parents were very hardworking. They were my dad was an immigrant to the US. My mom was a hardworking, kind of middle-class American woman, and they didn't believe in like, "Oh, we're just going to buy you games." Yeah. They're like, "Oh, you got to earn money. You got to get do chores, do part-time job." So after I finished Super Mario, I didn't have any other games. But I don't know if you knew, in the old days, there was this magazine called Nintendo Power. Yeah. And you can still find this online. It's crazy. You open it up, and on one page, it was in 88, this happened, 88 or 89. They announced there's a new game from a company in Japan called Square. And this game is called Dragon Warrior, which I think today they call Dragon Quest. Yeah. Right. And in Japan, they definitely call it Dragon Quest. And they're like, we're trying to, basically my explanation I got years later from people in the industry was, this was a huge game in Japan, but they didn't know how to break into the US market. They wanted to do that. They talked to Nintendo. And so they did a giveaway where if you filled out this form and you mailed it to Nintendo of America in Seattle, they would send you a free copy of what was basically Dragon Quest 1, Dragon War. I think it was Dragon Quest 3, Dragon Warrior. So that was like my second game and probably the most influential game on my entire life and career. Like, it just totally opened my eyes. It was the first game where there was levels and treasure and dragons and, an RPG, a story, characters that progressed and changed over time. So that was, I think, the most influential on what Artisan eventually became. That, and obviously my co-founder who lived in Japan and, studied Japanese and probably knows more about Japanese games than anybody I know. Like, he is amazing. So
bit of a guru.
It's funny. He scares some of the times when we go to Japan. On Astria, we worked with Kazusuke Nojima, who's the writer of the Final Fantasy and Kingdom Hearts series. And he's like, "Hey, remember when you wrote the Final Fantasy X novel?" And because he even wrote novels based on some of the game characters. He said, and then in the first part of the novel, you said this, this, and this, and this. And I remember we're all, basically having a dinner with him. And Nojima looks at him and he's like, I don't even remember that. Like it's like this is my book, and I don't. You know more about it than I do. So it was, yeah. He's very, his knowledge of RPGs is top. So it was between kind of my nascent interest and his really deep knowledge of the RPG genre, we decided to form Artisan.
No, that's really interesting. And obviously, you had that time in South Korea working with the studio there. How long were you with those guys before you then? Did you go back to the US from there, or
No?
Where did you go from there?
Actually, I've it's interesting. I've never returned to the US after that. So I left in 2004. I visit my family.
I was about to say, you've been back in the last 20 years. That's a really long time.
No, I visit my family, but you know how it is. It's one of those things where I kind of became like a European dev.
Globetrot.
And once you become a European dev, your network is there. So the people who would hire you is there. And as an employee, so even my whole network was, what I ended up doing after that, to condense it so we don't talk about this too long, was I often move from job to job because in games, it's quite unstable, especially startups. So what happens is you usually take a job wherever. If somebody offers you a job in China and you need to go because you need a job, you'll take the job. For me, I was at Real Time Worlds, and while I was there, they did a licensing deal with Electronic Arts to publish the game, APB, which was the name of the game that I was working on. And the guys at EA kind of liked me, who did the licensing discussion. So they're like, hey, you should really come over to the dark side, basically, And I was like, guys, I don't know anything about publishing. I've only worked in development. I don't really know this business. And they're like, no, don't worry. It's, you're going to like it. And they convinced me over time. So they had me in an interview. So I ended up going to EA and spending a bit of time there. And I was in and around Western Europe. So I think my whole career, I've primarily been in the UK, but I was also in France and Germany. And then with Artisan, we went to Canada to incorporate. It was mostly a French company, but at that time, Canada offered a lot of significant financial incentives. So that kind of began my journey in publishing. And that's really why I'm a CEO and, let's say, not a creative director or something like this. Is I like to say EA was my PhD in video game business, because they were very as a public company, we were managing P&Ls for FIFA, Need for Speed, Battlefield. So when you're working on franchises like that and you're forecasting numbers and it's a public company, so you're doing all this to the street, it affects the share price of the company. It was done it was like being back in banking, right? It was very rigidly done.
Everything comes full circle.
But you learn so much. I learned everything about how they sell games, how they market, how much money there really is in the games business. I didn't really know any of that. I was more a developer before then. So I think that really changed my life and my career trajectory big time, was that job at EA where they're like, hey, now you're a publishing director, basically.
That's really cool. And then, obviously, with Artisan, when did you arrive in Dubai? How long have you been here now?
It's been 2.5 years now. 2.5 years.
Because we met a couple of years back. I think it was the 966 mixer, just before the Game Expo. So 2.5 years in the region.
Yeah.
How are you finding the region when it comes to gaming? That's going to kind of lead me on to where I want to sort of go with this conversation. But how have you seen the evolvement of the region in those 2.5 years that you've been here?
Oh, I think the evolution is quite amazing. And I don't just say that because I'm here. And to me, when I came here, there was really nothing happening. In Dubai, there was no government presence, nothing. Since we've been here, the Crown Prince has declared the targets they have for the game industry. They've built a whole new group in the Future Foundation. Abu Dhabi has now had a big change where they have a new group of folks that are leading the strategy with the Department of Culture and Tourism. And of course, as you mentioned, 966, Savvy Games, PIF, all this stuff has happened since I moved here. Right? Which is pretty crazy. So I came here, it was honestly a bit of a lark. A friend of mine who had been in the games industry also about 15 years, a very smart guy who has lived most of his life in Japan, a friend of mine named Damien. Hi, Damien. And he was very interested in Web3.
Yeah.
Right. And had some knowledge and understanding of it. And he told me, Mario, I think there's going to be a lot to do with gaming and a lot to do with Web3 in Dubai in the future. Dubai and Singapore seem to be the big spots for this. Why don't you come here? He said, bring your family, call it a holiday. Come for a couple months, see what you think. If there's something interesting here, then you stay. If not, you just go back to Canada, no big deal. So that was how it started, basically, was him telling me.
Come and give it a go.
Come and give it a go.
See if you like it. And obviously, the big news for you and for your studio over the last sort of, I'd say 12 months or so is that you've obviously now the first foreign-owned studio within the kingdom, which is really great for you and great exciting news, and be good to just sort of understand a little bit about how that's going to look for you guys as well.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Saudi Arabia has been great. The Ministry of Investment there has been amazing. So it was, when I first moved here, it's no secret that when I used to work at Ubisoft.
Yeah.
One of my jobs at Ubisoft was, again, kind of this graduation from making games to more the business of games. One of my jobs at Ubisoft was to help negotiate with foreign governments for setup of new studios.
Yeah.
So at the time I worked at Ubisoft, it was 2012. And that was when a gentleman I knew named Yannick Thilar was moving from China, Ubisoft Shanghai actually, to come and set up a studio in Abu Dhabi.
Yeah.
And so, of course, when I came here, immediately I start sending Yannick, I'm sending him messages. Yannick, I'm in the UAE. Let's go have a coffee. I haven't seen you in years. We have to catch up. And he sends me a message like, hey, Mario, keep this under your hat, but I'm not in the UAE right now.
I'm off to Saudi.
And I'm like, what do you mean you're not in the UAE? Where are you? I looked at his LinkedIn, nothing's changed, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, where are you? And you have to understand, I was a guy, because I went from project to project, I bounced around a lot. It was quite normal for me. Yannick was like 26 years at Ubisoft.
Yeah.
So when he told me he was leaving Ubisoft, I was pretty shocked. I imagine inside of Ubisoft, they must have been like, ooh, because that's a big shift.
Well, that's a business. They have a lot of lifers.
Oh, yeah.
You see guys with 20, 30 plus years on their profile working.
Well, it's the same as Japan. France has what they call CDI. So it's a contract duration, contract length indeterminate.
Yeah.
So that's your permanent contract. Once you get one of those, unless you do something extremely illegal, you break the law, you do something like that, it's very difficult for them to release you in France. So most people, and what that means is you have a culture in France of when people take a job, they just kind of assume it's for life until they retire because they have great retirement, great pension. I get this question a lot. People ask me, oh, you work a lot in Japan. How come they don't do layoffs?
Yeah.
And I'm like, it's the same thing. So in Japan, what they normally do, maybe you've heard of it, and it's actually an issue, right, is when they don't like you, but you have a permanent contract, they can't get rid of you. So they do something kind of like Office Space or what was Silicon Valley, the TV show. They put you in the basement and like
hang out there pretty much.
They shame you. And that, it sounds funny to a Westerner, but people commit suicide. Mostly shame based. It's that because so much of your life is built around work that if your colleagues reject you and things like this. So it is an issue. Even the government is trying to legislate there. So it's not that they, if they could lay people off, I'm sure more layoffs would happen. Yeah. Everybody kind of describes it as a little bit of a utopia. How come everybody in the West, right now, everything that's happening in Europe and North America with companies closing and stuff, people are, how come that doesn't happen in Japan?
Yeah.
It's kind of the same reason it doesn't really happen in France, right?
Yeah.
What you'll see in France or Japan is studios being closed. That's what can happen normally.
No, that's cool. And then, so obviously, we sat down last week with the Dubai Chambers, the Future Foundation, to really look at what are Dubai doing? How are they going to go about it? What do they need to do to compete with Abu Dhabi gaming and Abu Dhabi as an emirate? What compete with Saudi and the Public Investment Fund and Steer Studios, etc. Which I thought was quite an interesting workshop piece that we sat down. It needed more than a day, in my opinion. I feel that we could have been sat there for a week trying to come up with ideas and how quick wins, shall we say. Now, for me, and you, obviously living in Dubai at the moment, what do you hope to see here over that next sort of 12, 24-month period?
I think
what would be your hopes for what Dubai can do within this industry and within this sector?
Oh, yeah. Well, first, I think Dubai has a massive advantage over the rest of the region. Unlike the rest of the region, and I love the rest of the region, as you know, I work in Riyadh, I spend a lot of time in Abu Dhabi, even my family wants to move there and live in Abu Dhabi, so, that's, and we have many friends there, but we've been in Dubai for the last couple of years, and what I can say is that whenever there were events around the region, the first thing people would ask me quite often is, how safe is it? Right? You get that all the time, even from people in Europe. Is it safe? Especially now with everything that's happening in Israel, right? And Palestine. People are very concerned about regional safety. Dubai is the one place that, because of Netflix and things like this, even my parents, who are, in their 70s, right? They're like, oh, they've seen Dubai bling. Right? So for them, Dubai is not this. Now, I think if you told people in the US, I live in Dubai, they assume you're a multimillionaire. That's like maybe 5 years ago, it was like, oh, where's Dubai? Is that in the Middle East? In their mind, they probably picture Iraq or Afghanistan. But now they picture, let's say, Singapore, right? So in my mind, that's given Dubai a massive advantage in attracting talent. I think people want to be in Dubai. I have people who, probably the only place I've lived in my life where people contacted me and said, I want to come visit you, are two places, Dubai and Paris. Those are the two places in my life I've lived. And I lived in San Diego, I lived in London, right? And oftentimes I was in Guildford, it was a beautiful place, Cambridge, and I love Dundee, actually. I still, that place was amazing. But those are the places that people are like, oh, we're definitely coming to visit you. And as an expat, that's quite good because I want my family to come and see me. And I think that's interesting. It kind of sends me a signal that people want to be here. So what I hope, to answer your question a bit more directly, is that Dubai does two things. One, I think what Dubai could be good at is what it does for other companies in other industries. So Dubai often offers tax exemptions and government incentives, essentially, for people to set up their crypto business or whatever in Dubai, things that they can't get anywhere else in the world. So they have to come up with some sort of unique program that doesn't cost them a lot of money, that can attract game companies here. I think that would be the first most important thing they could do. The second thing is that Dubai is known as a center of banking and investment, for sure. If you talk to anybody about Dubai, especially particularly you talk about real estate, Dubai's whole thing is, okay, we build Burj Khalifa and then you guys build, then we sell you the land. And it's a very, I would say it's an extremely clever way to get foreign investors to put money into your country, which is they build the Palm. And then they say, okay, now developers come and build the houses and invest in Dubai and you're going to make a ton of money here. So they enable people to invest in Dubai and get rich, right, in a very lucrative tax-free environment. I think if they do those two things, that would be the best thing Dubai could do, and people will come here. I don't think they need to do a lot of direct incentives or, what they need to do is create an environment where, companies come first, and second, where investors, private investors, want to come as well. There are a couple, but as you know, they're not really deploying money. They're mostly, a lot of people come to the Middle East to raise money, right? And I think that's a bit of an issue because what I've seen over the last couple of years, you guys can correct me if you feel like it's different, is a lot of people come with this expectation, especially if they're Western. They go, oh, okay, I'm going to come to Dubai, and it's not going to be like London or San Francisco. It's going to be easy for me to raise money. They spend a year or something here. They get frustrated because that's not really the culture even in Saudi, people think it's just bags of money, just waiting to be handed out. And when that doesn't happen, they get a bit confused because that's the reputation internationally. So I think that anything Dubai can do to attract that talent. And I think Dubai needs to attract high-level talent. I think it would be very tough for Dubai, and we had this discussion in the group where if you go to some place like Singapore, which is also very expensive, there is a middle-class population of local Singaporean people. That doesn't really exist in Dubai. The Emiratis generally, I mean, this is a generalization, generally are what we would class as upper middle class, people that are earning more than six figures.
Yeah.
And game developers tend to come from more the blue collar, middle class background. They're normally, they're not as high as a tech worker, but they're not like a tradesman.
Yeah.
So they're earning, six figures, maybe low, maybe just under, 50 to 100K would be, good starting salary for a game developer of most stripes. So Dubai, what I've noticed is people tend to live, there's very few, I would say, people who I even maybe like us, people who are, most people I know are either have expenses that are like 20K or more a month, or maybe 5K or less a month.
Yeah.
They're that whole 5 to 20K a month people, that mid crowd that you would see in London or in Paris, and I know that you get a lot of tax incentives and things like this here, but that's also reflected in the prices, right? Meaning rents are higher, food and things like that. Everything that has to be imported.
Yeah.
Right. Medicine's private. You don't have as much social benefits as you would in Europe, for instance. So I really think Dubai needs to attract people on the higher end of game development. And if they can do that, I think that they will become a hub.
No, I think they're making the right noises when you look at what Future Foundation are doing with the gaming residency, as I've been told it's called, not a visa.
Yeah, sorry. The 10-year residency.
10-year residency. But I think that that's the right noises, making the right sounds to maybe encourage people to come out here, set up, create an indie studio, create that hub, because that's where it needs to come. But looping back to what you said, I noticed it, and probably you did, the last couple of gaming expos, and the investors weren't there. Everybody there was looking for investment. I've seen polls on LinkedIn where I think DMCC put a poll out in terms of within the gaming ecosystem, what are you looking for? Is it upskilling? Is it looking for support? Or are you looking for investing? And I think it was like 60% investment. Everyone is looking to come to this region to get money, to build their game. But if that's not there, people won't come here and create that game because there's nothing to facilitate that. So it has to be something that the government does look at to create the starting point. Come here, we'll incentivize you, you can get set up, and then with that you can get the breaks to bring talent in and naturally let it flourish. Sure. And I think that definitely, in my opinion, and I think we saw that from the workshop that we did, is several opinions that kind of probably what needs to happen for the region to really kick on.
Oh yeah.
Because they're looking at it in a different way. Saudi are looking at it from an investment point of view, what they've done with Steer and Savvy and the acquisitions, etc. And Abu Dhabi are doing it in terms of support with what they're doing in terms of Unity and tax. I think the salary breaks that they're offering down there as well. So they're doing it. Dubai also need to then offer something in order to make that happen. And it's probably the best location. It's just not got the right incentives just yet, but I think that they are looking to make the right moves for that to happen, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So,
I think that for me, I think they have to decide what they want here.
Yeah.
If you could decide that, a lot of people, when they think about the games industry, they think of the whole, they think of, esports and arenas. They think
it is a little esports heavy at the moment. I think that's the kind of buzzword, if you like.
And that's the regional bias a bit, or it's mobile, and that because the things I notice in every region of the world, this is not just the Middle East, it's everywhere I've been, is that when the games industry is nascent and people don't really know the difference between a console developer, an indie developer, a mobile developer, an esports team, an esports broadcaster, a streamer. Yeah. Then they just kind of say, "Oh, we want the industry
it's generalized
here."
into
Yeah, it's kind of like sport. what do you want to do? Do you want an academy and you want to train people, or do you want a stadium and you want to sell tickets, or do you want broadcast rights, or games are kind of similar, I think. And that was, again, going back to my background, that education I got on what is the actual business of games and how people make money, I think really opened my eyes to the fact that, all the different places we go to, I agree with you that it really comes from normally the creation of a hub. It really comes from, I would say, government initiative to start. Governments are the catalysts, right? So, without giving away too much, I'm sure I could say in Canada, in Quebec, Quebec is a very famous hub for video games. And they started, maybe it was 25 years ago, roughly. Ubisoft, because they were French, went there and made a deal with the government for two things. One, we can't talk amounts, but they asked for a flat amount of cash. Basically, they said, hey, we need X many million, right, to set up something here. Yeah. And number two, we want you to create an incentive for us to bring people here. So they created what's called the MMTC in Quebec, the Multimedia Tax Credit, which subsidizes up to 30% of the costs of each. And they categorize these people. They have to be an artist or a programmer or whatever, a game developer. And then they deliberately because of Montreal's strengths as a city, Montreal is basically a big international city, lots of universities, very close to all the hubs in North America. So you're not far from New York, or even, it's a few hours to Seattle or LA. So then how they positioned themselves was, don't go to, LA and set up your studio and pay 10 grand a person. Come to Montreal, where you can pay half of that, plus we subsidize a third of the costs. You still have the same talent pool. It's close enough that we can recruit people from the United States. And they went from 0 to top 5 in the world in 20 years. Now, that was a 20-year journey, right? Yeah. So you have to really be patient. Somewhere, though, haven't you? Well, you just have to know. They knew quite clearly. They said, okay, we want developers. We want basically the premium industry, the console industry. Montreal is not big on mobile. No. There are mobile developers there, but it's not the thing in Montreal. And they were very clever that they actually were some of the pioneers of the outsourcing industry. So you have, for instance, Keyword Studios and people like that set up huge businesses in Montreal, so that, and those then often become studios, because once you co-develop games with Microsoft or Nintendo or Sony,
they normally pivot into their own IPs and developing their own stuff.
Eventually they go, or even the people that work there go, I'm going to form my own studio and get my own incentives from the government and build my own IP, right? And so that's how it kind of organically happens. So they went from 0 to now, I think they're 200, 250 studios, 6,000, maybe 5 to 10,000 developers in one city. So that's pretty significant. And I think Dubai needs something similar. Dubai needs to say, okay, here's where we are in the world. This is what we're good at doing. Yeah. Therefore, we're going to put money into this. I don't think, for instance, if Dubai wanted to follow Montreal's footsteps and offer subsidies and things like that, that they would attract the same amount of talent, because it's not the same cost base. It's 20 some odd years later. The industry's changed.
You could take a percentage size of that and easily become that, I think. Obviously, you won't get to that scale, but
His Highness wants top 10 in the world.
Well,
you heard that.
Well, we're here for the talent.
Yeah. Top 10 in the world. I was like, ooh. When I saw that on the Dubai, the declaration of gaming, it's like 30,000 employees.
Yeah, by 2033.
Wow,
it's ambitious.
It's very ambitious. I mean, to give you an idea, that's like more than Montreal for sure. It's probably more than Tokyo. Maybe there's some cities in China that have that many people associated. Now, they did clarify that they meant everybody in gaming.
Yeah.
Like so it could be streamers or
it's still a very, very large number.
Yeah, and that's where I want to make sure people understand that all those industries to me are quite different.
Yeah.
The way a console game, a PC game, an indie game, a mobile game, casual, all of these are so different. And I really think until they have a deep knowledge of the games industry here, what I would say is probably the best thing for them to attract, just haven't dug deep, but just on the surface level, when I look at Dubai, I think publishers are the best thing they could have here.
Yeah.
And it's really what the region is lacking, in my opinion. You get a lot of places like Riyadh where developers get money.
Yeah.
And they just make whatever. It happens to a certain extent here too. Emirati studios or young studios from the region who've never made a game. And normally if you speak to them, and you go, hey, what are you making? They'll go, I always wanted to make a Metroidvania or an RPG or, so I'm making, and the two things they usually do is they make a local story, which I have mixed feelings about because I don't think those generally appeal to and when you make a game, it's for the global audience.
Yeah.
And they also are making a game they want to make, which I agree it's important to be passionate, but normally, even for us, we're quite passionate about, obviously, Japanese style RPGs. That's what we make. But when we're coming up with the game, we're looking at the market and we're like, yeah.
You've got to find a space in the market and it's got to sell.
Yeah. And then you have to have an idea of, what are your competitors doing? How do you stack up? I don't get a sense. I think that's the big thing right now for me that's missing in the region is commercial talent. People who can look at a game and say, okay, yeah, this can make money.
Yeah.
Right now, I think the industry is so nascent here. Even the government understanding is if we give people who develop games money, they will make games that will make money, but not really. There is another component to it. The marketing, the sales, and I think that is completely missing in the investment side here in projects. So if a publisher were to come here and help. Like, okay, you've got a decent game, but we're going to help you make it better so that you can get some publicity, sell some units. I think that would change a lot here as well.
No, cool. Sounds good. So I think we want to sort of go more into maybe what we touched on earlier. You said your first console that you ever got your hands on was an Atari.
Oh yeah, 2600 was my grandfather's.
What was the first console that you owned that you got yourself?
That I personally purchased, I think it was PS2. It was PS2. Nice. Yeah. It wasn't until even PS1, I was like teenager.
Yeah.
Right. So my parents still but PS2 I had to buy myself.
I was never a Nintendo guy. I went Commodore 64, starting point.
Really?
So showing my age. Straight into Commodore 64, which again was at my grandfather's.
Okay.
So I went around there and I played some real game and putting the cartridge in, waiting for it to load for about an hour before you could even try and play the game. And then from there, I went into Sega.
Oh, wow.
So I went Mega Drive, I even went Dreamcast.
Dreamcast
and then went into Sony from there. Then I went PlayStation, and I've been PlayStation ever since.
Okay, never Nintendo. Interesting.
Yeah, I was Nintendo and also Sega Mega Drive. I had both, yeah.
Oh, wow.
But not my grandparents, and I feel like he just maybe played cards and dominoes. Now I feel really annoyed with him.
You're upset at
them. I don't even think my grandparents liked it that much. It was like a trick to get me to come over. Yeah.
Fair enough. What was the first game that you fell in love with?
Oh, wow. Let me see. I'd have to think about that. I would say, obviously, the most influential game was Dragon's Warrior, what I told you about. Probably the first game that I really fell in love with was just before that, which was the gold cartridge, which was The Legend of Zelda, the first one. I remember how impressed when that was one that my parents bought me. Yeah. And my mom picked it on the store just based on the fact that there was a gold cartridge in the store and brought it home. And I thought, oh, what's this? I was 8 or something. But yeah, that really changed my perspective a lot on storytelling, RPGs, action game. It was amazing. Okay. The original Legend of Zelda. I even replayed it quite recently on my Switch.
Have you played the new one, the most modern ones?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. Yeah, I've played all of the Zelda games for sure, 100%. All of them. I love them.
Nice. What was your favorite game of the last decade?
Over the last decade.
It's going to be a tough one.
Yeah, that is a tough one.
I was wondering if Zelda's still going to be up there.
I want to say over the last decade, probably. Yeah, it's very close between Zelda and, to be fair, I'm less of a fan of the newer Zeldas than the I feel like the newer Zeldas are following more Western trends, meaning they're more open world kind of thing.
I've still got Tears of the Kingdom, but I haven't finished it yet.
Oh, really?
I'm literally like an hour or two into the game, so yeah.
I want to say probably in the last 10 years, and it's funny because it's a game I played quite recently, the most influential games for me have been the Larian games. Baldur's Gate, Divinity.
I was going to say Baldur's Gate is surely going to be up there for
you. Because it's I mean, as someone who grew up playing D&D, this is the closest thing to a D&D game that you can play online. Even I played one of my friends from the US, who's my friend from high school. I've known since we were 16, 17. We used to play pen and paper games. He played co-op through 100 hours with me through Baldur's Gate 3, right? Okay. But yeah, I would say last 10 years, definitely Baldur's Gate 3.
What was the last game that you purchased?
Actually, the last game I purchased was here, which is Rebirth, Final Fantasy Rebirth, Final Fantasy VII PS5. Rebirth.
Good.
I played it last year at TGS for the first time.
Yeah.
Probably the best Final Fantasy that's been made in the last 10 years. It's amazing.
Strong statement.
You should see it. I mean, it's the level of detail, the way they retell the story, even the fact that I'm starting with Sephiroth, the villain, essentially, right, who's so popular in Final Fantasy mythos. I really feel like with the Rebirth series, the remake, Final Fantasy VII remake, is it's exceeded my expectations on how good the first two games have been.
What are you playing at the moment?
Right now, there's two things that I've been playing a lot of. I started playing Civilization again because I guess they announced Civ 7 is coming soon. Yeah. And that kind of woke me up. The PC ports of Ghost of Tsushima was released. And because of that, they did a free upgrade to the PS5 one, a 4K.
I'm on the PS5 one now.
Yeah. So
you just started playing, haven't you?
Beautiful.
I mean, it's maybe one of the most beautiful games I've ever seen. And, even for its view of Japanese culture and things like this, I'm not Japanese, so I can't say it's extremely authentic, but my Japanese friends tell me, for Gaijin, it's pretty good, right? It's it's well done and very peaceful, beautiful game.
My partner can sit and watch it and enjoy the story and the visuals.
Yeah.
She's quite happy sitting there while I'm playing it.
Yeah,
interesting.
Yeah, it's an amazing game. So that's the one I've been playing most recently. I think I have 70, 80 hours because I'm now on. They have the main island, Tsushima, which is where most of the game takes place, and then they have another island called Suji, which is the expansion island. So I'm on the expansion island fighting the Mongols. This kind of thing.
Decent. And what are you most looking forward to games-wise? What's the kind of next title that you're have to buy, really have to kind of set some time aside to play?
Oh, I mean, that one's easy. So this year, the remake of Dragon Quest III HD is coming to Switch. Yeah, I think even I saw Famitsu released a thing last week that it's the #1 wishlisted game in Japan right now. So that I've waited, I don't know, 15, 20 years. That's a huge one for me because it's like Square redoing Dragon Quest III. So that looks amazing. I think for the ones that are coming, in the next few months, that one's also, we're working on a game that comes out in 2025. So I'm quite keen because I think most of the content for that game will be done by December. Yeah. And so that means this Christmas I can play through kind of our entire game. We've been working on it for 3.5 years. So it's our third game as a studio. It's an action RPG, obviously Japanese influence, called Lost Helden. So I'm looking forward to sitting down at Christmas and just playing the game from start to finish, right?
Cool.
Perfect. Well, look, we've kind of concluded our time, I think. I thought we were going to be pushing it over, but we've done really well for time. So Mario, thank you very much for coming on to what's going to be our first episode. Absolute pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
It's an honor to be on the first episode. Wow.
We wanted to start as we mean to go on, so thank you very much. And thank you for joining us, and hope you enjoyed the episode.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.